right. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for coming back to our second meeting for our portion of the Research Practice Collaborative. We're focused on mid-career teacher retention in Kentucky. So, Bree, you want to go to that next slide? Do we have, I think we have at least one, maybe two people who were not with us at the last meeting. So we'll take a couple of minutes just so that we can do some introductions. Was anyone not present with us last time?
Hi there, I'm Jenny Fair from Northern Kentucky University. I'm the College of Ed Dean there, and sorry to have missed last time. Had a bit of a family emergency, but I'm here today and looking forward to the conversation.
We are super excited to have you. If everybody else, if we'll go around really quickly and just introduce yourself and kind of share where you're from. I'll start. I'm Ellie Gilbert. I work at the Kentucky Department of Education in the Division of Educator Recruitment and Development. And I could actually see you all this time. I couldn't see you last time. So I will kick it over to my counterpart today, Bree Massey.
Hi, everyone. I'm Bree Massey. I am the Educators Rising State Coordinator, and then I work alongside Ellie and our Division of Educator Recruitment and Development. And I'm also eager to listen and learn from you all. Thank you, Ellie. Oh, Ellie, I think you're muted.
I'm muted. I turned my mic off for a second and I forget. So I'll go down the list. Amber Hinkle.
Hi, I'm Amber Hinkle. I'm a 21-year teaching veteran at Yellow Creek School Center in Bell County.
Preston Graves. Sorry, you all.
Hi, I'm Preston Graves. I'm a fifth-year special education teacher in Franklin, Kentucky.
All right. Leslie McKinney.
Hello, I'm Leslie McKinney, a former educator and administrator, and currently I'm a researcher and data analyst for the Department of Education.
All right, Tara Rodriguez.
Hello, Tara Rodriguez. I'm a director of the Division of School and Program Improvement here at the Department of Education.
And Suzanne Farmer.
Right. So I'm Suzanne Farmer. I'm the Chief Academic Officer in Danville Independent Schools, and I'm excited to join.
We also have some folks with us that are kind of supporting for the Board of Education and for the Education Professional Standards Board. So Dr. Brewer, go ahead and introduce yourself, and then Dr. Jones.
Hi, I'm Meredith Brewer. I'm the Associate Commissioner in the Office of Educator Licensure and Effectiveness.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Glypta Sangrider Jones. I'm the Director of Education Policy here at KDE, and I support the Kentucky Board of Education. I look forward to listening and learning from you all today.
And from my point of view, that's everybody except Jessica, who is running our tech, and we appreciate her so much. So did I overlook anyone? All right, well, then it looks like we're it. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So just to remind you that our priorities for today are to explore some solutions at the systems level, kind of moving from diagnosis to action, and to start preparing some policy recommendations for the Kentucky Board of Education and Education Professional Standards Board to consider after our work is finished. Just to remind you of our norms. We will respect all voices. We'll stay focused on our purpose. We'll use evidence and experience. We'll be constructive and concise. We'll always assume positive intents, and we will honor time. That one's always important to me. I put on there last time that we will keep our cameras on, but that's not possible for everyone, and we're all grown-ups, and it's okay. So if you can keep your camera on, that's great. If you need to have it off, that's okay too. All right, so our next, okay. Just to give you a refresh on what our whole project is all about. So we've been charged by the Professional Standards Board and the Board of Education to come together and examine some research and Kentucky specific data and identify root causes of mid-career teacher attrition. And then with that, we will move ahead and we'll develop 2 actionable recommendations that those 2 governing bodies can take out and maybe pass some policy or find some ways that we can really make meaningful change in Kentucky around teacher retention. So, next slide. This is our question. This is the big focus that we have. What are the primary factors contributing to mid-career teacher attrition in Kentucky? And what are some targeted strategies that might help retain experienced teachers during this critical phase of their careers? I think the wording really matters on this because it keeps us focused on 2 things, understanding the factors, and then also finding the strategies that will help us be specific enough to take action. So those are 2 really important parts of this. And it also sets apart mid-career teachers because they do experience different challenges than teachers at other phases of their career. So early career attrition can be tied to specific challenges with induction issues. Maybe they might struggle with knowing what to teach and how to teach it. Late career exits are generally about retirement. So in the mid-career, we're really looking at burnout, which we'll talk a little bit more about today, and some structural issues in the profession that we think we might be able to work with. So let's look at the next slide. Last meeting, we kind of identified through our research and just through our professional practice and the teachers that we know and love and are, we identified some things that we know drive mid-career teachers to leave the profession. We talked about work-life balance, and we talked about how that's very elusive and very slippery. We don't really, can't really put our fingers around exactly what that means, but teachers identify that a lot. They want better balance with their work time and their actual personal lives. We talked about planning time interruptions, and tied to that, workload and administrative burden. We have so much to do and just so little time to accomplish it. And so often that planning time is taken for other things. And so that's a real struggle, especially for mid-career teachers who have learned to be efficient and have learned to use their time wisely. They get very frustrated when that's interrupted. We talked about leadership and school culture being a big driver. In fact, one of the pieces of research that we talked about identifies that as the number 1 thing that causes teachers to stay or to leave. We talked about the lack of leadership opportunities and career advancement for teachers. If they didn't want to move into administration, what was there for them to do? We talked about student behavior challenges. That theme continues to emerge in the Impact Kentucky survey and just in other pieces of data that we studied. So that was a challenge. And also emotional well-being, which may be tied more to work-life balance. So it's all kind of in there together. It's like a ball of yarn, and you start to pull and it all starts to unravel at the same time. So those are some of the things that we heard at our last meeting. We're going to reframe this through some of the research that we've done. And I kind of highlighted some things. Some of this I put into your additional research folder this week, and I've just kind of dropped things in as they've come to me. But the Kentucky Exit Survey that we administer to teachers as they leave the profession, although we don't have a huge number of responses to that, they are very consistent. And they say work-life balance, and they say their workload, and they say administrative burden. That's what they say. That's why they're leaving. The report that the CASA Coalition to Sustain the Profession, they identified for teachers, it was just general working conditions. I was on that work group that talked about that, and a lot of that was around student behavior and just a poor school culture. 2 things that I've kind of added this week as I've done some more research. There was a 2025 well-being report card, and it was not across all states. It was spotty across the United States. Kentucky was not included in this, but it reflected Kentucky attitudes as well. And one of the big findings that it shared was that teachers needed well-structured collaboration opportunities, and the emphasis on well-structured collaboration and supportive leadership. And then another piece that I've added in there is a study by Dr. Brewer, being the go-to teacher. And I think we can all look at us on this call together. We're the ones that you can count on. That can overburden and isolate those folks who tend to be the ones who you can depend on, who are going to see things through to the end. It can isolate them and lead them to burnout. And another finding in that study was that collaboration is good, but forced collaboration is not. And that kind of fed back into what the well-being report card talked about. If it's well-structured and purposeful, yes. If it's just to click a box, it tends to be one of those things that really irritates teachers and makes them feel unappreciated and not valued as a professional. And really in this one, administrators set the tone for that. So that's just it. All of the research that we have examined supports our personal experiences that we've collected. None of this should come as a huge surprise to any of us. We've been around teachers and we know kind of what they're going to say. So let's look at the next slide. So I'm going to stop talking here in just a second, I promise. But again, the research kind of pointed to, if you sorted it into buckets or levers, there were three things that really we could look at and focus on. One was about career advancement opportunities growth. One was about respecting the time and maintaining manageable workloads and planning times. And one was about culture that stemmed from leadership practices and professional respect. And those were kind of the ways you could sort that. Everything fell into one of those three buckets. Next slide. So the first one, really thinking about, and we talked about this a lot at our last meeting, those leadership pathways to keep teachers in school connected to instruction, using their expertise, using their experience, and they don't have to leave the classroom to advance. And so in some of the research that we looked at that was in your packet, they talked about, creating roles like mentor teachers, instructional coaches, lead teachers, curriculum fellow, data leader. And so I would like to pause for a few minutes and see if anybody has anything to say. Did I leave anything out of this particular bucket of work that we're thinking about? Just to kind of touch back to, go ahead.
Yeah, something that I am hearing more currently that I haven't seen represented anywhere, unless maybe it falls under the professional respect, is a heavy dependence on curriculum programs and not allowing teachers to kind of be the teachers and to monitor growth and to enact change or provide feedback and interventions when necessary. I hear that a lot. Maybe it's because I'm in a different space, but I hear that a lot from teachers. I'm not sure they're leaving because of that, but I hear that as a frustration a lot. I'm not sure what bucket that might fit under, but anyway, I was just interested that was not part of the list.
That is, I think that is emerging. Personally, and in my circles of friends that are teachers, that is what I hear a lot of too. It's a frustration that I do think will lead to burnout, that lack of autonomy and creativity. And yeah, I agree with that personally. Just to kind of touch back on this one a little bit. So in the Booth research that's cited in there, that one, Josephine Booth and her colleagues talked about, they don't want to go into administrative roles. Like, that's not why they got into education. That's not their goal. That's not what drives them. They're really interested more in staying connected to the classroom. And that narrow pathway to administration filters out a lot of really good teacher leaders. And they that's a point in their career where they may decide to go a different route and not stay in education because there's not a lot of opportunity for growth there. I see that we have got Dr. Robinson with us. So I'm excited that she's here. So I just want you all to welcome her.
Thanks so much. I was just delayed. Pardon my
That is
delay in
okay.
getting on.
That is okay. Amber Hinkle has her hand up. So go ahead, Amber.
I can also, this is year 21 for me doing special education in grades K through 8. This is where I'm at with my career and profession, because there's oftentimes that I'm seeing all these things that I do, but I'm one of those people who doesn't want to be in the administrative role either. Like my rank 1 is in curriculum and instruction. So that's where I base my stuff on, things that I want to grow and do here in my county. But those roles are often passed on to people who know people and things like that. And that's why people like myself get frustrated in our schools. And why we think about leaving other schools is because of those type of opportunities don't present themselves enough.
And I think sometimes those are a stepping stone for people who do want to go to administration, so that they aren't always open to folks who are like, no, I love curriculum. Let me work in that space. Definitely. I think that I really do. I think about in that middle of the career, it's like I've done this, but I don't want to do that. So where do I go? I think that is definitely, and the research reflects that that's definitely consistent. Let's look at the next one and we can come back and talk about these a little bit more. This one, realistic workload and protected planning time. Teachers, and if you are a teacher right now, I know you can attest to this. Planning time's interrupted. You might have a meeting during your planning block. You might have administrative tasks that take up that time. You may be called to sub in another classroom, and that's the reality. Sometimes there's not a way to prevent that, but there are some ways that we can begin to be proactive about it. And so in the research, some of that talked about protecting the planning blocks. If a school's able to offer 2 planning blocks, and one of those is protected, we don't ever schedule meetings during that time. I worked at a school that was like that. We had 2 plannings. One of those frequently was dedicated to meetings, but the other one was guarded, and we didn't lose that time unless there was an absolute, earth-shaking emergency. It was always protected. Finding out ways that we can reduce the administrative burden on teachers, and then some creative scheduling models. So anything anyone wants to talk about that they've experienced or seen or read in this lever 2 kind of situation? I don't know what a realistic workload looks like. I don't know. I think that's, that's an odd, it's just maybe a unicorn to search for, but.
I have a principal that I work with closely that she has done a really good job of, like, when they are preparing to do a certain something where they might need like copies as a grade level or whatever, like she puts that on the office staff to take a load off of the teachers of having to worry about making copies for stuff. Like if they're trying to plan ahead a little bit more so that there's things like that are there's no reason for teachers to have to make copies unless, if you don't plan far enough ahead, you might need to go and make copies for stuff. But just really trying to help with little things so that there's support for the busy work.
Sure. And I think that's important just out of respect. I think that's just a nice measure of extending that professional courtesy. So Dr. Fair had her hand up, and then I think Dr. Robinson.
Sure. So there are in Kentucky some schools that have done some different things with scheduling. Is that right? Like gone to year-round scheduling or done things like that. I wonder if we have any data around that, and then to see if how that impacts you know, we might have some data around achievement, but I wonder if we have any data related to that and teacher burnout. And then also the Center for American Progress has a couple of, I've read a couple of things from them where they have produced some interesting scheduling, some ways to do scheduling differently. And I know this is more of a policy discussion and not a practical, you know, how districts could implement it. But there are some interesting ideas that are out there, like a 9 to 5 day where some teacher, I'm sorry, a 7 to 5 day for students where some teachers work 7 to 3 and some work 9 to 5, and the students have different accessibility for whatever they need during that early block or that late block. And with some, of course, some compensation embedded for teachers who do some things in those extra spaces. So I don't know. There are some ideas that are out there. Again, this is probably more of a policy discussion and not about the specifics. But it would be interesting to see some data around that, and not just impact on student achievement, which obviously is important, but on teachers and how they would feel about some interesting ways to schedule things differently, or to allow for such schedules could allow for more planning time, for example. And yeah, sometimes planning times are so short that you just get started and then it's over and you really haven't gotten much accomplished. So anyway, that's it for me.
Yeah, Dr. Robinson.
So looking at this and the previous lever, I was thinking, okay, if we take the whole of the job, you would have to find time for some of these functions plus professional development. So how do you manage all of that? And some of the professional development needs to be collaborative. And I think that is part of what happens in planning time that gets interrupted so frequently. So are there models for organizing time in a way that is that it's proving more satisfactory? I think is the question I have.
I think that's a great question. I'm definitely, well, I will write that down because that's definitely something that we want to look at. And I think Leslie has her hand up.
Hello, and sort of along those lines, I'm thinking back to, you know, often school districts have built-in early release days for professional development and that sort of thing, and they're very specific about what you can do on those days. And oftentimes it's follow-up to larger PD that maybe they were introduced to in the fall or the summer. But there's not a lot of time dedicated for the planning piece that goes with that PD. And so I was just curious about perhaps thinking about the calendar in terms of, and I'm going to call this micro release days, where there's an opportunity for designated planning that's an aside from professional learning, because I do think there's an imbalance there. We're often just charged with doing the planning piece on our own after PD. So just throwing that out there.
Preston.
Something that my district started last year was that we have a common planning to where everyone on my team, so I work with 5 gen ed teachers, and every Tuesday during our planning time, we get together, and that's the day that we have our PLCs. We don't have any after school. We just do it every Tuesday. If we don't get everything done that Tuesday, we go to the next Tuesday, to where we get those other 4 days to do our planning that we need to do.
Definitely. Tara.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on one of the articles that was in our new articles in the folder this week. And it had to do with workload, and it had to do with the 9th grade teachers who were really had these huge classes. And then some other teachers had very low numbers of students in their classes, and the school did this whole plan of what they could do to address this imbalance, and they also figured out the finances of it, and they did a lot of research, which I thought was really interesting, the amount of research they did to determine how could they do this, what would it cost, and come up with a really good plan. So I wanted to mention that one as well.
Yeah, there were some really interesting solutions that people have tried. some people talked about like a 4-day school week with a, where you didn't have class one day. And I was like, well, I could see the benefits, but I can also kind of feel that pushback that you would get from folks. So there were some, and I love that. I do remember that one that they talked about looking at the financial piece. And I think it's really important because lost time has to be made up somewhere, and we pay for it eventually at one end or the other. Anyone else have anything to say about lever 2? This is really good conversation. I think one thing, if you get a chance to kind of look at Dr. Brewer's work, she talks about, like, we know that relationships matter in schools. Like when we look at the state interviews that we've conducted with the Go Teach KY ambassadors, that's one of the things that they say, like, I stay because I love my team and I love the people I teach with, and this is a family. But that can also, if it's not purposeful and productive, can become another burden. We have to spend time together, but we don't really have a clear directive. We're not getting to use our time well. So I think, just making sure that everything we schedule is purposeful. And I was on a call once. It was actually for the CASA work group that talked about working conditions. And the teacher said, I can't be there because I have a PLC. And I asked my administrator if I could step out of the PLC and take this meeting. And he said, no. And she said, well, is there anything I could do in advance and maybe cut short? And he said, well, I don't have any plans, but we can't miss it. And I thought, oh, that's, I think that happens. Like, we have our time and we have to use it, but it's not necessarily useful and important. So just a thing to think about, like, why are we doing it? It could be great, but it could be not used well. We'll look at the third one, and then we'll have time to talk about all of this. So this one is I think the another unicorn, those leadership practices that support retention. So this one was the big reason that most people reported that they are leaving the classroom. The research by Boyd, I think, the Boyd article talked about, like, this was the strongest predictor of if they were going to stay or they were going to leave. If they started to kind of become dissatisfied with the school culture and the way that the leadership worked, they were out the door within the next year or so. And I think especially when you look at mid-career teachers who may have experienced different leadership styles throughout their career, and they know what a great principal can do and how that culture can be, and then they start to experience maybe one that's not so great, they leave. And that's maybe that's an oil and water personality situation, but what can we do to help administrators know what they need to do to create the culture in their schools? So this, I thought about the PSEL standards for principal that principals use, and there's 3 or 4 of them, I think, that I thought about most of all. The 6th standard talks about building professional capacity for school personnel, like just really skilling your teachers up. And that would be something that would build culture. And then standard 7 was creating a professional community for teachers and staff. And that goes back to that strong, positive, collaborative culture. And then the 10th standard is really school improvement. I don't remember what the 9th one is or why I put that in there, but at the moment it seemed like it was the thing to do. So really looking at helping principals focus on those standards and improving themselves professionally, and how that will grow their teachers as well. Using the working conditions survey, the impact survey in that data and improvement planning, looking at including teacher voice in decision making. We hear that a lot in the state interviews, is that teachers, feel like their voice is valued and it matters. So that's a strong predictor of retention. And then highlighting promising retention practices in schools. And this was one I think that Dr. Fletcher had mentioned in our last meeting, was like trying to find the schools that are doing this well. That was a little bit of a struggle for me. I'm still in the, like, I'm sorting through the data to figure out who is doing this well with specifically with mid-career teachers, but I think that is definitely something that we can look at doing. So if let's any discussion around this one, and then we can move into just general discussion about recommendations. Dr. Robinson.
Just the question for, maybe we put it in the general chat. I'm wondering if any of these rise to the level of policy. For example, do we incorporate in continuing licensing processes and so forth for principals something about retention, requiring a reflection on retention of staff or other indicators of highly productive school culture and climate as an aspect of the role? Do we, I mean, maybe this is, you don't want to get to the licensing issue, but recommend to school boards that we create a school culture, climate, student achievement resource. But I'm curious. You know, we're a policy making body, and so I just, as we think about these things, that question occurs to me. So thanks for allowing me to get it off my chest.
Well, and I thought about too, like in the past, that working conditions survey did factor into the principal's evaluation, and it doesn't now. And I don't know if that's good or bad. I don't know. I mean, it just is. But should it be? And that's kind of, I think that's, yes, Leslie, go ahead. Oh, actually, Preston and then Leslie. I can't see who's first now.
So just something that I thought about is the working survey. Is it our scores went down at my school and in my district, and I have yet to heard anybody talking about them or like what they're going to do to improve those to retain these mid-year teachers.
Mm-hmm. Again, it is kind of from my perspective as the person who is the impact guru. We don't have a lot of teeth. It's not a mandatory, like we don't make you do anything. I think it is a free gift that they can use, and I think they would be remiss to skip it. You know, I think that would be a poor choice, but maybe I can't make them, but yeah, I think maybe we look at that. But yeah, Leslie and then Dr. Fair.
Well, along the lines of policies, and I'm going back actually to lever one, because one of the things that really was standing out in my mind was in terms of keeping these teachers in the classroom, but still providing them an opportunity to be leaders. And maybe there's already something like this in the work that I'm just not aware of, but I'm thinking like creating teacher leader endorsements where they could get micro credentials. Let's say they could get a micro credential in coaching, in mentoring. They could get a micro credential in data analysis. They could get a micro credential in PLC development. And that those sort of lead to, you know, them get, and we know we have lots of different endorsements that they can get, but the ideal would be having teachers having maybe one period a day where they're not in the classroom. Maybe they're in the classroom, you know, they have 4 classes, a planning period, and then they have this period of the day where they're in that leadership role, whatever their expertise is, according to their endorsement. So maybe they're mentor co-teaching. Instead of just mentoring a teacher in a PLC meeting, they're actually going in their classroom and co-teaching with the person that they mentor. And so just sort of honing in on what their expertise around leadership might be. Maybe it's literacy. But actually giving them that pathway, and then having that pathway, you know, obviously connect to some sort of funding. I know some countries do give mid-year retention bonuses. And so instead of giving teachers sign-on bonuses, giving them those that maybe have these credentials who agree to teach for another 3 years in a Kentucky school, maybe they get an added stipend added. So I'm just kind of thinking about a pathway similar to structures we already have.
Yeah, yes, and I promise we will actually get to that. That is definitely, and I looked at different salary scales. I dropped a few in. Some were interesting that they did like 0 to 5 years before you ever got an increase, and 5 to 10 years before you ever got an increase. So that I thought, well, that would, I don't know, you might stay till year 15 to get that increase. I don't know if you would. Dr. Fair.
Yeah, and you all can call me Jenny, by the way. So a couple of things. One of the things that I think is problematic for culture is that just as we're not keeping teachers, we're not retaining teachers, we're not retaining administrators. And so I know that there's been a lot of effort around the principal position. Statewide, we see that in proposed legislation this legislative session. I really do think that it's that's part of the problem too, is that the retention at all levels is pretty low. And at least superintendents I talk to say they've got lots of applicants for assistant principal jobs, but not for principal positions. It's a lot. And so that's just more of a comment. That's not very helpful. It's just context. But something to kind of follow up on what Leslie was talking about, which I think is absolutely true. I was really interested in the North Carolina, and we may be coming back to this later, the North Carolina, I can't remember what they called it, advanced teacher pathways or something, career ladder, whatever they called it. I thought that was a really nice way to give some teeth to a credential. Leslie, we actually in Kentucky have a teacher leader endorsement. And for a time, Kentucky, like master's degrees, programs in Kentucky were required to have a teacher leader component to them, but they were really, unsuccessful might be too strong a word, but they weren't really as useful because they didn't lead to any change in what people could do with that particular endorsement. So tying a micro-credential, if we don't want to call it an endorsement, but tying some kind of preparation to a skill that's more competency-based that could lead to specific leadership roles, I think is a really exciting thing to consider. Again, I know we're policy and not practice. I get excited about the practice stuff, but I think that's from my point of view, I think that kind of thinking could lead us into some really powerful recommendations for policy.
I was in that time period in my career. A lot of my coworkers were getting those teacher leader master's degree, and they were like, "It's great, but I don't know what it means or what do I do?" So yeah, that was I think it may be a missed opportunity. All right, let's look at the next one. We've kind of already done this, but so did I leave anything out? And obviously I couldn't get it all in there, but did I leave anything out that was major? What are some strategies that might work? What's within our control? And I think this is where we do look at what could we recommend as policy? And what are our opportunities to move that forward? Of course, we like the idea, I always go back to this. We like the idea of increasing salaries, but that's really outside of our control. But within our control might be recommending some pathways for teacher leadership that could increase teacher salaries in a smaller way. That might also help us retain teachers who are interested in growing and learning. And that is one thing too that comes out in sort of in the impact survey, is that teachers aren't really super pleased with their professional development options. They don't really feel like they're personalized. They feel like they're, just kind of going with the flow of things. So that might help with that as well, and increase kind of workplace satisfaction in that way too. So that's definitely something to think about. So kind of a free for all right now. If there's anything I left out, anything we want to add, and then we will do some work. Dr. Robinson.
One of the concerns that I think brings this question to the fore is this issue of, I guess in today's parlance, they call it talent management. We have an education workforce that has a lot of skills and a lot of capacity and different levels of expertise in all of those skills. And we are not using kind of a skills-based approach to allow people to discover and develop passion and pursue that passion to get really good at an aspect of this work, because nobody can be really good at all of it. But I'd like to imagine that a principal's job is to hire a staff that has like a repertoire of really solid skills across all of those functions that have to be used in the process of increasing student learning, so that it becomes kind of a talent management approach. And that means, the idea of micro credentials would be really important, because teachers would be able to be more aware of where their talents and their passions might really land to make a difference. So, and I'm just going to say once again, the thing that really worries me, if we don't do anything, we miss a chance to really incentivize people who work in schools, who do teaching, and some who do it really with a lot of passion, that can quickly wear out if their passion doesn't have a way of being fulfilled because they are using what they know. The point from which they discover what in addition they want to know. And so it has to be more than just meeting the workload in terms of student assignment and that sort of thing. It has to be more integrated into how are people using the skills that they have to accomplish the goals that we have in this organization. And maybe that's what principals need to be learning.
I think that's excellent. Is there anything else before we start talking about what kinds of recommendations we might want to make? If not, we'll go to that slide. Okay, so here's what we're going to try to do today is to narrow down all of this good stuff to our two selected strategy policy recommendations that we think might have the best chance at making the most impact. So the things that we want to include in our recommendation is what's the change that we're proposing? What's the evidence base behind that? And we can I'll tell you that in a minute. And then how is this going to improve the retention? So what's the change and how will it work? So if we want to propose a change that's something around micro credentials, we can definitely find that research. We have some already. How will that improve teacher retention? And we're going to work together to kind of draft these. You guys will throw your ideas all in there and then I'll sort through them and bring them back to you next time. But those are our kind of big things. So does anybody have any ideas about what you think our two particular recommendations need to be? Because we have some time to discuss and then come up with like our two favorite things that we want to recommend. Okay, Jenny.
Yeah, Ellie, if we have, if we move forward with a some kind of recommendation around personalized professional development with the opportunities to upskill or credentialing or something like that, since we know that the teacher makes a difference in the classroom. Not tying that to any kind of compensation, I think it doesn't feel good. And I know that we don't have,
it throws that balance off a little bit further, doesn't it? Like
it really does. I think that any conversation we have there, we have to assume that there is going to be some money to support it. And I don't know that that looks like a promising assumption, but I think the upskilling, everyone's in the field of education, most everyone's in the field of education because they have a heart, they have a service leaning disposition, right? But that can only take you so far. If you're upskilling and taking on leadership roles, there should be compensation that's part of that discussion. I don't know that we have to say a specific amount, but I think having that discussion without bringing in some kind of elements related to compensation, I think it's going to be a dead end road.
I agree. Any of our policy experts want to weigh in on that? I'm just a facilitator. Leslie.
I'm definitely not a policy expert, but I totally agree. And I'm thinking about structures, and just to piggyback on that before I jump to another idea I had. And first of all, let me apologize. I'm talking a lot, but I'm very excited about this work. And so just eating it up. But to piggyback on what Jenny said, I think there are already structures and places in salary schedules that allow for example, content leads or PLC leads who in lots of districts already get stipends for being the team lead. I think having people rethink about how they're using those now, that's with the understanding some places can't afford that. I get that. But I do think that is absolutely a fair comment. I think it will not land well. It's, oh, you want me to get better and no more for no more, right? One of the things I was thinking of outside of that and thinking about the workload, understanding that we're fairly limited at the state level outside of policy of what maybe we could provide, is thinking about what England, what they did with in 2018, they came out with a school workload reduction toolkit that they created. It's quite powerful. And they did it at the state level, or at the national level, actually, where they created this toolkit that advised school level leadership using research with ways that they can reduce the workload of teachers for the specific purpose of reducing attrition. And part of that is the flexible work schedules. How do you do that? What does that look like? What are some examples? And so I was just thinking, could we potentially come up with, based on research, a guide that districts, depending on what their assets and resources are, could tap into to say, hey, if this is what my data is saying about why I'm losing teachers, let me go to this section of the toolkit and see what some other folks maybe have done. So just an idea.
I love that. Yes. And I feel like I read, and I don't know if I put it in I don't know if I put it in there, but one thing was talking about making sure administrators are aware, and for administrators too, but when we put one thing on a plate, we take something else off so that we make space. And I know it's hard to do that. It's easy to say it. Suzanne.
Yeah, so I think I like the idea of the toolkit, and some other ideas I think that could be helpful to put in there. Our district recently did a revamp of our salary schedule, and that took a ton of work. And there's some things in there that like one of the when you look at salary schedules, typically there's not a lot of good rhyme or reason between jumps in their pay scale and across ranks and things. That was something that was a really intensive project for my superintendent and chief financial officer, and they spent a lot of time calculating sort of the best increment of jump between each year and how much that was going to cost, and how to kind of calculate some systems, and how to do incremental equal jumps every year instead of waiting for those 5-year gains, and really educating how you would educate staff about how those short incremental jumps are better because you're getting the money sooner, and that accrues more money. And I think that like there's some things that you can do to educate superintendents, chief financial officers, and even staff about some of the money behind those decisions. And then they did things like they calculated how much we spend on subs and how much we save if we do attendance incentives for staff to have perfect attendance and things, and how much, even though we're paying staff to come to work, and that really is sort of your job to come to work, but how it saves the district money on sub costs, and it's also better for students, so staff are there. So like there's some things like that that I think there could be, you can't really, I'm going to just say that like you have to be really careful about putting something in policy that's going to be seen as an unfunded mandate for schools. They're going to resent that. And when I was doing work with the national board, there's a lot of superintendents in the districts that still resent that national board is not a fully funded stipend for teachers, and discourage their teachers to become board certified because they see it's money that they have to spend that they didn't agree to. So, you know, you just have to be really careful about that. But I think if you educate people in a toolkit to say, this is one way, and this is research saying, like, here's a spotlight of this district that did this, and then they saw this attendance increase, and here's a strategy that they used to have more subs, and by having more subs, then people didn't have to lose their planning periods to cover for subs, and here's like strategies that have been put in place that have worked, or how you can, rather than paying people one set stipend for a thing, like how you can pay them extra hourly to do this work so that they're paid more equitably on their workload, and the superstars in the group that take on more work for that team are getting paid more rather than everyone getting paid the same.
I put your salary schedule in the
yeah, I saw that.
I
Yeah,
was like, that's just smart. It's just so smart.
mm-hmm. But I kind of need to pair, like I think that like you would need to pair it with some explanations to people to help them.
Sure.
Yeah.
Dr. Robinson.
So, I mean, the money is important, and how you use personnel money is really, really important. So one of the issues, it's always been an issue with board certification, is that often you get the credential, which is a very significant career honor. I mean, it's an honor to the whole profession and certainly to the individuals. But if that additional money is not actually accomplishing additional impact, it adds cost. And yes, I think it's important for teachers to have the opportunity to credential themselves in this way. But what more do you want for that money? And so so even the career steps that we have in the salary schedule, does it simply mean that the teacher is doing the same thing they were doing on the first day of year 5, and they're still doing it on the first day of year 10? That doesn't add impact. And we still have a lot of work to do on what this money means and what impact means. So finding a way to create this career idea so that teachers know staying connected to the classroom is not necessarily a 100% delivery of instruction job. It includes the professional development leads and things like that, that those credentials qualify you to do at a very competent level, at a level, and you've got confidence in the work of the folks because they have the credentials to show they know how to do the work. So I think that all of us have to really kind of embrace a philosophy of what personnel costs are supposed to get you, and what performance goals are we going to attach, not in a highly formal accountability, high top level accountability scale, but a accountability for student achievement at the local school level scale is something that we really ought to think about as the other side of this, as the other side of the coin. Mention accountability and everybody gets quiet.
Well, I think too, like looking at tying this into with the local accountability models, like what if your teachers were showing their growth in the same way that we're wanting to have students show their growth? I think that could be an interesting way of looking at it too. So far we've heard some sort of personalized professional learning, upskilling that has some compensation recommendations tied to it. That might be a recommendation. Something around developing a workload reduction toolkit, something around creating a guide maybe to help administrators understand how they can, I hate to say creatively spend their money because that sounds illegal or something, but you know what I mean. Ways that they can spend the money in maybe ways they hadn't considered before, that there might be options, and we aren't just, just a standard salary schedule is maybe not going to cut it anymore. We need to look at different ways that we can reward teachers for lots of different things. What else do we want to consider before we move into our kind of drafting and working time? And from
Ellie,
go ahead.
I'm so sorry to interrupt. I didn't raise my hand.
That's okay.
But just to kind of make sure we're working within current state regulations, right? We're not making recommendations for the legislature to consider, obviously not this session, but in subsequent sessions. We're really working within the confines of what the legislature already allows us to do in schools. Is that correct? And if that is correct, then do we have someone who is making sure that the things that we are recommending fall within that?
Dr. Brewer. She's our policy guru.
I think that this group has been charged by both boards to be as innovative as you can in the recommendations that you bring forward. So you do have two regulatory bodies, so the Education Professional Standards Board and the Kentucky State Board of Education, that have the authority to promulgate regulations and amend existing regulations that could open up some of the flexibilities that you've all discussed. They also have a strong advocacy presence, and they can, share with legislators where there may need to be statutory change to have some of these recommendations be fulfilled. But also you can make recommendations that are really to the department and the staff in our office to sort of develop toolkits and resources and things like that. So I think that was the long answer of, I think all things are on the table, and I don't think you need to feel confined to the existing policy landscape.
That was a perfect answer, because that was exactly my question too. It's like, what are our boundaries? And just know that all of these toolkits are going on my list. And so if they don't come out of here out of our recommendations, they will go on the Ellie Gilbert list of things to do as time allows. We may see those in some manifestation someday. So do we know what we want to do? Before you go on to the next slide, I don't remember what I put on there next. Oh, okay. So what we're going to do is we have a Padlet that I tried to think of ways that we could just add ideas and work individually. But what are our two things that we want to work on? Like, we need to come to a decision. And I don't think we have to take a vote. We're not like a advisory committee that's doing, but we do need to come to consensus. So, and I'm not a good dictator. I'm definitely at the will of the people here.
So Ellie, it might also be helpful if we sort of do one
Yeah.
together, maybe, and then we can kind of walk through, because I do think in that considerations box, that might be where, as Dr. Fair mentioned, this would be perceived as an unfunded mandate if there was not a funding source designated. Some of those sorts of things I think would be
Any
in that
kind
box.
of walls that you see might come, any kind of problems that might come into come to play, like that's where considerations things we might think about. Yes, Dr. Robinson. You're muted.
Oh boy.
I know
was
I do it. I've
sensing
done it
that-
5 times in this same meeting.
That we are, I was sensing we are near consensus on this notion of some specific mid-career teacher credentialing teacher jobs. For example, the list of those jobs that have to happen in schools, the assessment coordinator, the instructional design expert, the jobs that not everybody needs to be the expert in, but every school needs to have on the staff somebody that's really skilled in this area. I like the one of the community cartographer, the person whose job it is to help people find the resources in the community that need to be brought into the school. Not everybody's going to have the depth of knowledge to do that, but somebody ought to, that's near at hand and or that can be made accessible to support teachers and their work. But have that be structured in a more explicit way so that appropriate compensation can be assigned. This is not a job that you might keep for 10 years because you might decide to become another kind of expert before those 10 years are up. But as long as you are working successfully in that job and in that school, that is an added responsibility for which you are paid, or it's a responsibility that makes up your workload, and you are paid additional you're offered additional compensation for that role. That's one way to say having a career is important, because not everybody's going to have the same career path.
Absolutely.
Obviously.
My comment didn't come up.
I'd like to see us pursue that recommendation.
I think that's an excellent one. I don't know why did it not come up. I don't know. I thought I left a comment on there, but I guess I didn't. So I'll just
I'll try, Ellie. Let me see right here.
Who knows? Yeah. Can you maybe add post after?
I can add,
Oh, I don't know.
add a comment under on the recommendation proposal. Is that something that we would want to?
Oh, yes, and I think it did. It's just not showing up unless you click on it. On mine, it shows up anyway.
Ellie, I think it might be under recommendation 2. I do see a comment there.
Well,
I
then
do
that's
see
right.
it. That's where it is.
That's right.
Yes.
So I did do it right. I just didn't put it in the right place. So that would be one of ours and I can even put it on there. I can edit out what recommendation is being proposed and just type into that one. Some kind of personalized professional learning to skills, competencies, compensation, and workload. And we know what all that meant. Yeah, see there, it worked. I did that. And so then we can just go in for the rest of them and add comments or posts. What do we want to do for this other one? We've talked a little bit around some recommendations for administrators. We could look at like something with workload. We could look at something with tying, I don't know, I don't think principals would respond very well to that, but tying school culture to their standards and their evaluations. I mean, it is part of their standards, but
I was going to suggest some kind of incentive or even training for principals to provide individualized coaching to support teachers in their changing career, changing responsibilities, and making sure that what we're giving the teachers is what they need to match. Because a lot of times I feel like folks do PD in general. And if a teacher is not at a beginning place and they don't need it, it's discouraging. So incentivizing or encouraging with training principals to be able to differentiate professional learning and provide teachers with what they need for where they are.
I think that falls in with the personalized professional learning. Like, I think that goes with it, like equipping principals to identify that talent. Dr. Robinson.
Yeah, I guess I have a question. This provokes this question. What do our standards for principal credentialing say about human resource management or talent management or HR, to use the old phrase? What are we aiming at for principal development? Should we look at that? Because somehow that seems to be related. Principals are really critical here. And so what are we expecting the right stuff?
Standard 10J is about empowering leadership and teacher and administrative leaders. And there's also standards about human resource management and providing support for teachers in several areas. For example, I had a teacher who felt uncomfortable because someone was bothering her at the gym. She called me and I got up at 6 a.m. and went to work out with her. I know it's not directly related to PD, but it's what that person needed at that time. So there's things like that, but 10J is the big one where it's about empowering leadership.
Do you feel like principals receive enough preparation around that, or do you feel like that's an area that could be enhanced? I mean, I just don't know.
No, I agree. I think it can definitely be enhanced. What I've noticed over my years is that when a school lands in the bottom 5 or there's some other factors, principals receive specialized training. But just in general, once you get out of, principal school, it kind of can depend on your mentor or your experience. And so there's an array of different quality in terms of understanding that folks need things that may not be monetary to help them stay in this field that is so important, but also can be very, time consuming and difficult. So it is what I've noticed a lot is the reactionary training. So if test scores go down, then principals get training, but they don't necessarily get it until I wish I could say somebody notices a problem, but really it's when the school the school is not successful.
Right. Everybody else is just dog paddling and barely keeping their heads above water, and no one has noticed. So they don't offer them the lifeline that they've offered the school that is struggling. Dr. Robinson.
So, I mean, the old saying is, if you're not growing, you're dying. So the schools, every school needs to be supported with the requirement of improvement goals. I mean, it's not to be mean or anything. It is just to make everybody aware our responsibility is to continue to learn and grow and continue to improve. So, until we get that notion, really fear that we're gonna be stuck in the mud by our own volition, because you gotta have this philosophy of, because it's kind of like a rule of nature. If you're not growing and improving, you are going to atrophy and eventually become useless.
So would we feel okay maybe making a recommendation around providing enhanced supports for pre-service and in-service administrators, particularly around their responsibilities in human resource?
And I would urge us to think seriously about the term that we use. HR,
Yes.
I feel,
Human
is
capital
antiquated.
management.
We got to get beyond that, because really it takes talent to teach. And when you got a repertoire of talent, you got to deploy it in a way that makes sense to get the job done. So let's see if we can introduce some language that is more appropriate to the work that is needed.
So I updated it just then. We will wordsmith that, but maybe would that be a good one? Maybe we could add in there. Suzanne.
Yeah, I agree with what is it Jamaica? Is that how you pronounce your name? Okay, what you were saying as well, because like I've in fact, like I'm doing our districts grow your own, and this week's is heavily on like how to support teachers and how to handle some also some sticky stuff that comes up. Like they don't, and I say all the time, like they don't teach you in principal school how to handle the things that, like they don't tell you about the teacher that needs help at the gym, or like they don't tell you about those things at all, but how do you handle some of those things, but also how do you grow people? And I was looking, it's when the PISA, like in our standards, I was thinking it was 6 too, because I was thinking of the professional capacity school personnel is the one I'm looking at. And that one looks at how you develop the capacity and opportunities and support for teacher leadership and leadership from other members of the school community, empower and motivate teachers and staff to the highest levels of professional practice and continuous learning and improvement. Like there's a ton of stuff in 6. And I think that maybe this idea of building the capacity of your school is maybe the language. I don't know if that resonates with you, Dr. Robinson, but like avoiding HR. I get that. HR is part of it. HR is the yucky part, but hopefully you're living above the HR part and you're in that growing part more.
And
but
7 goes right with it. Professional community for teachers and staff.
Yes, for teachers
so
and staff.
6 and 7 are.
Yeah, agreed. And there isn't good support for that typically in a district office. That's unfortunately, like you have your HR people, and there's not really good professional learning out there for principals in that area, and it is like super important, and they don't really teach you how to do that anywhere.
I'm adding all of these things that you guys are saying into comments, so I won't forget them. I feel really good about those. Like, I do feel like those are good. Tara?
I wanted to make the suggestion that on the recommendation, I think that it needs to be in a complete sentence and it needs to state who is responsible for this, because right now I can't tell who is responsible for doing this. Is this a recommendation to the school board, the state board to study these things, or is it a recommendation to put this into policy for someone to implement?
I'm making those notes too.
So it's my hope that these recommendations will go to both boards and perhaps lead to another joint board meeting that is in fact a deliberative session where we take responsibility for studying understanding the recommendations, understanding what our what our authority is associated with those recommendations and what we need to advocate for to embrace it. I mean, if the study group comes with the recommendations, I think both boards feel a kind of like we own all of them. We got to understand how each board can address them. And hopefully, even in addressing them, we'll continue reporting to each other and do so in a unified fashion. I can see going with EPSB leadership to advocate for changes that you want to make whatever the authority is you must approach to make that change. And sometimes it'll be our own authority we have to address with these changes. So, I can't give you a roadmap, but I can give you a conviction that the recommendations will be received, and because these are important issues. Nobody is looking at this. Why are we losing teachers at year between 5 and 7? When I saw that, I was horrified. That is, you can't afford to lose these folks.
You start all over, with it, and you start that cycle all over, and it's so expensive and time consuming, and kids suffer, and it's just, yes, Leslie.
And just before we end up getting off, and I apologize, I just found my notebook where I had taken my notes. One of the other research projects I had looked at was that we haven't considered, and maybe we want to, is the work that Australia did. They actually have a workload reduction fund, which actually puts out pilots where different districts, in their case, they don't call them districts, but essentially they apply for showcasing innovative projects that will reduce workload and maximize the value of teachers and school leaders' time. And so they commit to that, and they did it in phases. And so essentially it's boots on the ground. They made sure they had geographical dispersion of those so that small rural places were included in some pilots as well as more urban areas, but essentially just sort of giving districts the opportunity. I'm putting that in our lens, essentially giving districts an opportunity to showcase things kind of like what we saw with Suzanne's work, that maybe they can pilot and show work, how they're addressing teacher workload, and how that can be done with really the resources maybe that they already have or can expect to continue to have at least. So just another idea. You all may not be interested, but I thought that was kind of an intriguing approach.
And that fits really nicely in the work that our division does anyway. So like that's not for nothing, even if we don't adopt it as a policy that we want, or a recommendation. It's definitely something that we will take with us and continue to work on. So as we only have a few minutes left, here's kind of my charge for you. Take this Padlet, make notes on it, make comments, post on it, whatever you need to do. I will take all of this like it's a bunch of virtual sticky notes and put it together, and have the 2 recommendations smoothed out. We will work on those at our next meeting. We'll look at them, make sure that they actually represent what then I pulled all of those virtual sticky notes together in a way that makes some kind of sense. But so I will work on those and pull them together, but just continue over the next week to add to this. I taught middle school, so I can interpret just about any note that you put in there. If I will do my best. And if not, you can just email me ideas. If this doesn't work for you, and you just want to send me an email and say, here's what I think we need to put in there, that works too. I will just synthesize all of our stuff, and then I'll have those ready for you on our next meeting, which is in 3 weeks, the 30th, I think, of May, the 30th of March. I was skipping 2 months there, you all. That's how ready I am for summertime. So just work on these, add language in there that you think, like I wrote, enhanced supports for pre-service and in-service principals in human capital and talent management. That needs some wordsmithing. Put your thoughts in there. How do we need to say that? What would be a better way for that to work? In the evidence-based column, add pieces of the research that we have studied so that we can justify this. Under the expected impact, we think that if pre-service principals, in-service principals have more tools for human capital management, that it because administration is one of the leading drivers of attrition, this will improve retention rates. So whatever you want to say, put it in there. If you don't like this, send it to me in an email. That's fine too. And then we'll just kind of, next time we should have 2 pretty things that I'll share with you, and we can polish them up and be proud of the work that we've done. So are there any questions or comments before we finish? I love that we can always end on time, because that's a big thing for me. I love to be punctual. So you guys have been wonderful. I will continue to add your thoughts and process all of this. Again, like, I could not come up with new ideas in the middle of a meeting. I have to have some time to think about it. So that's just how I work, but it's been great. If you need anything in the meantime, you have questions, let me know. And otherwise, I will see you in 3 weeks.
Thank you.
Thank you.